Well, there's two issues. The first is how we have talked about the role of government has been very narrow. At best, it's been one of just fixing different types of market failures. If instead we look at those countries around the world that have in fact grown through innovation-led growth, through these kind of investments that I talk about, research and development, human capital formation, these are countries where what the government actually did was much more than just put some bandages here and there. They were really driven by big missions, whether it was, putting a man on the moon in the past or tackling climate change in the future. The question is, in order to really inspire business investment, to really want to engage in new difficult areas, what we see is that the public sector has to play a very active and courageous role. I talk about it in terms of an entrepreneurial role because what I've seen in looking at sector by sector is the public sector in these successful economies, I'm not talking about the basket case countries, in these successful economies where the public sector has been willing, able, and funded enough to in fact engage and invest in those really difficult areas. So if you think of it in terms of capital intensity on the vertical axis and technological and market risk on the horizontal, that upper right-hand quadrant is usually starved of private finance. And it's in those countries where the public sector has been willing to directly finance that kind of crazy stuff, which looks crazy today, but in the future it generates massive profits, like the internet, which at the beginning there was no private investment. It was in fact publicly funded through a diverse group of public agencies, but it was definitely public sector funded. The private sector only comes in later. So biotechnology, the same thing. The private venture capital only entered the biotech sector about 15 to 20 years after the state sort of took on the really difficult early investments. And we see this today with clean technology. And what's very interesting in developing countries is that whereas like in places like the US, you actually have public funding agencies, so DARPA, National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, in emerging countries that are really targeting innovation, we see an increasing role of state investment banks. Now, state investment banks do exist all over the world, and in some parts of the world, we're seeing them as really taking on this kind of innovation, entrepreneurial role. I would sort of single out China and Brazil as having two very dynamic state investment banks.